Block Party DFS show with Jmtowin from 1 week season. It's week 12. You guys know the drill. We are going to do a slate overview. Then we will go position by position, get JM's favorite GPP plays. And then we'll wrap up with a lineup build on DraftKings with some of JM's favorite building blocks for the slate. I'm Pete. This is the Block Party. Let's do it.
Peter's one of the greatest depositors I've ever seen.
Trust the process. Let's go.
I got auto match with Levitan. Bullshit.
I just go the other way. In that 66, I win all the money. All the money.
If I had 150 lineups, I'd win too.
AP, crack spot bullets in your head like KD. Bust it, bitch, go bust it. And I had 10 pints with me in Russia.
Hey, everyone.
All right. Hey, everyone. Indeed. What's that smirk, JM? You're in way too good of a mood right now.
Yeah, I was just thinking about how I told you before the show, sent my wife and kids out of town yesterday for the holidays. I'm joining them on Tuesday, so home alone, but kind of smiling because I've got this roll of toilet paper as my compatriot right now. If I slide off screen, I've got this sinus cold that been dealing with the last couple of days. So I'll try to remember to mute the mic and take care of what I need to take care of, and I'll slide back in.
Okay. I got worried there for a second. I assumed maybe a Kleenex box for the nose. With the toilet paper, you had me really concerned. We might have an emergency on our hands.
Yeah. Do grown-ups get Kleenex boxes? I haven't gotten on board with that. So
April, I feel like, has had a perpetual runny nose of late. So we've been blowing through Kleenex, but I'm like you. I'm kind of all purpose. Lauren gets mad at me because sometimes I'll just use our paper towels. Like if I need to blow my nose. Yeah. So I'm down for
yeah. Then you get the red nose at the end of the day. So yeah, I've learned from that one, but toilet paper is good enough for me.
All right, let's get into it. Unless you guys want to hear Jam and I talk about all of our favorite household tricks during cold season. All right, week 11 recap. We had two standout performances. It was the Lions going nuclear and Taysom Hill going nuclear. How did week 11 treat you?
Well, I played single entry and 3-max last week. I've been taking a break from MME the last 2 weeks, and so I would imagine I would have had Taysom Hill in MME. I've been heavy on Taysom Hill the previous handful of weeks, but didn't have my built like 5 or 6 rosters. Didn't have him. It's funny because Geno Smith was one of the 4 tight ends featured in my player grid. He put up 31 points, but that kind of got overlooked because Taysom put up a 46 pointer. And then the Lions, I think that's an interesting discussion, right? Because we have a track record all season of if they're controlling games, they're not throwing the ball a ton. And then last week they were kind of like, hey, let's use this as live reps, get some practice in. Threw it 29 times, which isn't ridiculous, but it is kind of ridiculous for the Lions in a game that they're controlling. They scored 3 touchdowns on the ground before they ever scored one through the air, and then still managed to score 4 touchdowns through the air. So it was one of those where some of the tournaments I was in, several hundred entries, I was looking up at the top to see, all right, how many people had Lion stacks? Literally 0. And it's just one of those reminders of when we see these 28, 29, 30-point game totals in games where you expect the offense to control it, you expect that offense to not stay aggressive, we should still keep in mind that the chances of them staying aggressive are higher than the field is going to give it credit for. And sometimes we just get those tournament, it's rare, but we get those tournament wins from games like that. And we should always be aware of them. I think we have one of those potential spots this week. Again, low probability that it actually plays out that way, but it's higher probability than the field typically gives it credit for.
Yeah. I was similar to you. I had Taysom on a build. I had some Lions pieces on a build, but just not together. And it was one of those weeks where you had to be nearly perfect. Obviously, like you said, there were some Janu teams up there at the top, but it's really hard to compete with some of those outrageous scores from Amon-Ra and Taysom there. But, we're going to look forward here. We're going to get back to the top of the leaderboards in week 12. So let's start where we always do, little slate overview here. Kind of a lower scoring slate, just looking at, the totals, some of these matchups. What kind of jumped out to you when you first started reviewing the week 12 landscape?
Yeah, I mean, it's a week where there's not a lot of games that project to be particularly high scoring. We have 4 teams that are implied to score north of 25 real life points, and all of those teams are expected to win in blowouts. I think the lowest implied total among those is the Dolphins at 26.75, and all of those teams are expected to win by 7 or more points. And so one of the questions we can ask is which of these games could actually end up being more competitive? And then which of these, because ideally we saw it with the Lions last week. it's not so much that you're betting on an individual player from that offense as if you bet on an offense and you cover 3 spots on your roster, or even 4 spots on your roster from that offense has this huge game, you end up getting to benefit across the board, where you end up getting a 200x, or 200 point salary multiplier pace across 3 or 4 spots on your roster. So typically that comes not from blowout wins. Typically that comes from competitive back and forth game environments. So we can kind of isolate these 4 teams at the higher game totals and say, are any of them potential spots where we could cover multiple spots on our roster at once? And then we can also look at some of these lower total games and say, are any of these ones where maybe the game total is in the middle of a broader range of distribution, right? Where Vegas isn't saying, hey, this game's going to play out this way. Cardinals and Seahawks is a good example of this, right? Vegas might not be saying, hey, this game's going to play out to a 47.5 point total. They might be saying, this game could play out to a 60 point total. This game could play out to a 40 point total. We just know that about 50% of the time it's going to be on either side of this 47.5 point number. So those games with the broader distribution around that total is also something we can look at this week.
Yeah, I always like kind of pointing out maybe a few team dynamics that might be different in previous weeks. And if any of those kind of jump out to you, obviously we have Tommy DeVito taking over for the Giants. We got Anthony Richardson in his second game back, kind of a pretty surprise performance as far as how well he performed after being benched. I'm trying to see if there's any other kind of curveballs. The Chiefs running backs could be an interesting new dynamic with Isaiah Pacheco back. Are there any kind of shifts you're thinking about of how teams might, be different or approach things differently than they had been?
Yeah. Have we gotten word on Pacheco?
I have not seen anything today. I know he had been practicing, but haven't seen final word.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those where I could see the Chiefs holding him out, which obviously then with, DraftKings, I think one of the main things we should think about this week is DraftKings had these sweeping price drops across the board. So if anybody's been looking at the DraftKings app, looking at player pricing and thinking, oh, these guys seem cheaper than they've been, that's because a lot of them are cheaper than they've been. And it was like a very proactive move by DraftKings. It was across the board. But also this year, players have been overpriced relative to where they're typically priced for their range of production. And so a lot of these guys, it's not like they dropped the prices and we're saying, oh, these guys are cheap now. It's like these guys are maybe just a little bit overpriced compared to before when they were quite a bit overpriced. But there are some spots where we're getting some significant discounts, right? If Isaiah Pacheco's out, then Kareem Hunt's a screaming value at 5,700 against the Panthers, where the big concern against the Panthers is a lot of times that running back won't see their typical number of touches. But looking at the Chiefs, if Pacheco's coming back next week, it would make sense for them to just ride Kareem Hunt in this one. So there are some spots there where those price drops really going to make a difference. So yeah, the Pacheco news is worth paying attention to. Mike Evans coming back is worth paying attention to. What that does to the Buccaneers' upside, what that does to their offense. Baker has been one of the highest scoring points per game. He's the highest scoring quarterback on this slate, and he's 6,100, and he got Mike Evans back. What does that change for the way that Bucky Irving and Rashad White and Kate Otten have been used? Does it change the way that they've been used? And then, Tommy DeVito coming back for the Giants. And, last year he topped 27 pass attempts only once, but he's also playing the Bucs, where typically, teams end up throwing the ball more than they normally do. So, yeah, there's a lot of interesting components on this slate. And a lot of places where it's like, is there upside that's going to emerge? Probably not. And so it's one of those slates, right, where we could see pretty low scores. You look at the most popular wide receivers, there's question marks across the board on the most popular wide receivers this week. And so certainly a week where some sneaky pathways could be available to us to first place.
Yeah. And did you have any thoughts? I guess maybe you could pair these two together and we can kind of segue into quarterback as we do this. But, basically, is it real with, say, Anthony Richardson and Jane Daniels? Richardson gets benched, comes back, has a big game. Jane Daniels now coming off a 2-week stretch where he has not performed well, and yet 2 tough matchups, maybe dealing with the rib injury. How are you inclined to view those 2 quarterbacks as we head into week 12? Yeah,
I'll start with Jaden. This Washington offense is good, right? But this Washington offense is also good. They're not great. They're not an offense that for fantasy purposes has been blitzing the scoreboard and winning us tournaments. Jaden Daniels has that 128 pointer this year, and that's the only game this year where you really would have wanted to have him even at this price tag. So Daniels is one of these guys who, can he put up 23, 24? Can he even sneak his way to 28? Yeah, but I'm not super scared of like him type of situation where he would end up posting a score that you had to have in order to win this week. Anthony Richardson, that one's really interesting because we've seen in the year, whether it was Bryce Young coming back and looking better, not looking like somebody we want to play in DFS, but certainly looking like a better quarterback. We've seen these guys take a break, come.
All right, guys, it looks like Jam's breaking up a bit. I was trying to make sure it wasn't me there. It looks like he dropped off, so he will come back in a second. Catching up on the chat here while JM reboots his internet. People excited about Tommy DeVito. Vito Power shouting out Giant Squid, who won back-to-back Millie Makers there. Pretty sweet. Do we got JM back here?
Looks like it. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah. I had asked the chat. You were glitching out for a second, and then you fully dropped off. But I think I got you now.
Okay. On my end, you were freezing, so I was like, "Uh-oh, Pete's going," but it was me. Yeah. Where did we get cut off there?
You were kind of right in the middle with Anthony Richardson talking about it being kind of an interesting dynamic.
Okay. Yeah, we didn't really miss much. Yeah, the Anthony Richardson thing it's interesting. We've seen players go to the sidelines and come back looking better. Josh Allen did it his rookie year. Bryce Young, to a lesser extent, has done it so far this year. That little bit of time on the sidelines, reorient your mind. It's also, I mean, this guy went from like 44% completion rate to like hitting all his throws. So I don't know that I'm necessarily buying that this is a total change. Right? I mean, 20 of 30, that looks like a regular NFL quarterback type of game there. So yeah, I mean, Anthony Richardson is one of these guys who he's always in the mix. I've been playing him in these 13.5 point games, these 9.76 point games, these 7.08 point games. And then, if I were MME last week, I would have had him in this 29 point game. So I think his range of outcomes remains what it has been. I don't know that I'm buying him as a consistent guy that we can just bank on that type of production where you're like, oh, he's 5,600. He's clearly underpriced. He's clearly underpriced for his upside. I wouldn't say that he's clearly underpriced for what you're going to get from him this week. With Anthony Richardson, we really just don't know.
Yeah. And how are you? I know we kind of always talk about this dynamic with some of these rushing quarterbacks. If you were using Jaden or Richardson, would you be inclined to stack them this week?
Yeah, I mean, typically, you look through the data on running quarterbacks. Typically, there's going to be somebody who hits with that guy. And so what we always say is it hard to guess who that somebody is? Yes, right? So the inclination is to be like, maybe I'll just take the one off. But also, if you're in a tournament and other people are playing that quarterback and somebody is hitting with that quarterback, then that means somebody's roster is getting the player who hits with them. So you're now chasing that roster. So yeah, to me, if you're taking Anthony Richardson, if you're taking Jaden Daniels, especially Jaden Daniels, right? He's 7K. You're ideally saying he scores like 30, 32, 35 points.
Yeah.
He's probably taking somebody with him. So whether you play Zach Ertz or Noah Brown or Terry McLaurin or even Austin Eckler, right? You throw somebody in there because it's likely that if Jaden Daniels hits, he's bringing somebody with him and somebody else you're competing against is getting that score. And so you want to be the one trying to get that score yourself. So yeah, both these guys, I would aim to target somebody with them. I mean, if Anthony Richardson is throwing the ball like this, Josh Downs becomes viable. The issue with Josh Downs with Anthony Richardson out there is like, well, Anthony Richardson can't hit these layup throws. So if he's hitting the layup throws and also hitting the intermediate throws and Josh Downs is getting the ball in space, there's upside there. Same thing with Alec Pierce. His price has come down to where those 4 or 5 targets, we'd love him to be 4,200. But, once you get down to this 5K range, guys like Xavier Worthy, guys like Alec Pierce, they start to become interesting with tighter pricing because, yeah, you'd like them to be about 1K cheaper, but there's still guys who can hit for 25 points on limited volume, and people are just not going to be on them. So, yeah, I think that playing Anthony Richardson in particular would be the guy I would be likely to lean toward, but playing him, I'd want to pick somebody to stack him with.
Yep. Completely agree there. And I do expect Richardson to be the most popular play on the slate, just coming off a monster game at home, only 5,600. That is going to garner a decent amount of attention. Before we kind of settle in the mid-range, we talked about 2 high-end guys there. Let's go all the way down to Tommy DeVito. There was some enthusiasm in the chat. You get his start here. So he has the stone min for quarterbacks on DraftKings at 4K. Can we entertain a DeVito punt, a la Spencer Rattler a few weeks back?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully not a la Spencer Rattler, right? But yeah, I mean, DeVito is not he's not a joke. Obviously we make jokes about him. He probably got this starting job because of the the meme ability, and the fans love it. So if not for that, I would have to imagine it'd be Drew Lock starting. But yeah, I mean, he had six starts last year. He had like 7 games where he played kind of significant amount of snaps. He scored 14 plus in 3 of those games. He scored 17 in one of them. He scored 22 in one of them. So when you just think about a player who costs 4K, he scored 10 plus in 6 out of 7. Think about a player who costs 4K. And you think about a running back who costs 4K, a wide receiver who costs 4K, even a tight end who costs 4K. Tommy DeVito is the best point per dollar play out of all the players who cost 4K and below. Yeah. That's not really in question. The question is that the quarterback that you should play? Because this is the onesie position. So then if Baker goes out and puts up 30 at 6,100 and Tommy DeVito puts up 14, you're probably not winning a tournament with Tommy DeVito's 14. If Kyler Murray goes out and puts up 30 something and Tommy DeVito puts up 14, you're probably not winning with 14. So the question is really like, how do you see the rest of the quarterback position shaping up? And are there any guys who, if Tommy DeVito goes for 10, 12, 14, like that could still win you a tournament if all the rest of the quarterbacks are scoring around 4x their salary multiplier or below? But the question is, like, you got to look through the other quarterbacks and think, okay, who are the quarterbacks who could destroy the Tommy DeVito rosters? Because also DeVito has 22 points within his range of outcomes. He has a 20 plus point ceiling at 4K, and that's really nice. And I don't think you necessarily have to stack DeVito either, because what you're playing DeVito for is you're saying at 4K, the score that I can get has so much value if none of the other quarterbacks are smashing on this slate, which, 20 quarterbacks on the slate, 19 other quarterbacks on the slate, that might seem like a steep proposition of like, yeah, really none of the other 19 are going to hit. But when you look at the matchups, the game environment, the price tags, it's not unreasonable to think that DeVito scoring 14 to 16 points is actually the best way to go. But him scoring 14 to 16 probably doesn't get Malik Neighbors there at 7,400. So you could play him with Theo Johnson, who's a tight end I really like. I've played quite a bit this year. He's 2,900. That's one way to play DeVito, really open up salary. Or you could play him with just no stacking partner and say, okay, I'm really just playing DeVito for the salary savings. And I think that's viable this week. So is he the best way to go? Not necessarily, but there's certainly a pathway to this slate developing in such a way that he ends up being the way to win the tournament this week.
Let's talk about some of these other kind of pocket passers in the 6K range here that could garner some interest. You mentioned Baker Mayfield in this same game. We could talk about the Seattle and Arizona game. Geno Smith is looking like he's going to be popular at 5,700. Brock Purdy has a Q tag. But the Niners always seem to be in play with their team total here. What do you think about some of these other names?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this let's start with the Niners and Packers game. This is a game where I was going through the DraftKings app on Wednesday and kind of building up my player pool, my initial player pool. And going through this game, I was like, I don't really have interest in anybody from this game. So then Thursday, I get to writing up my DFS interpretations, and I get to this game and reference my list, and I'm like, really? 49ers and Packers? I don't have any interest in players from this game outside of Christian McCaffrey. That's the only guy I really like. That seems surprising with these two explosive offenses. So I went and looked at the game totals. The 49ers are only implied for 21.75, the Packers for 24.75. And I was like, okay, like I hadn't looked at game totals yet, but according to what Vegas is seeing, according to what bettors are seeing, that was actually a sharp take to say, no, I don't really have any interest in this game. At the same time, you have two really explosive offenses. So I see this as one of those games that we referenced at the top where the range of outcomes around these implied totals is pretty broad. Like it wouldn't shock us if we look up on Sunday evening and this is a 30 to 33 game or a 32 to 35 game, right? A game where there's some back and forth where both teams are scoring points. So I think that this is a game that's really interesting for full-on game stacks, but that's not particularly interesting outside of that. And then obviously we have the on top of that, it's like, well, is it Jawan Jennings? Is it Debo? Is it Kittle? Is it Jaden Reed? Is it Christian Watson? Is it Romeo Doubs? So you still have to guess on top of that. But this is a game that certainly has upside in it. The likeliest outcome is that this game doesn't produce tournament winners outside of Christian McCaffrey, obviously being interesting. And maybe you guess right on one of the wide receivers, one of the pass catchers. But there's certainly a pathway to this game as a whole taking off. And I think that's my preferred way to play this one.
Yeah, I like that. I like that thought as well, because then the spread out nature of those offenses that you mentioned, you have a wider moat when the game goes off. Because if you're double stack, you have multiple pieces. It's like, if you're just trying to triangulate, a skinny stack and a bring back, it's like, well, it could be anyone. But if you load up on that game, you increase the surface area that you could hit on being right.
Yeah, and it's not to say that you can't guess individually or that other people won't guess individually and get the right piece, but then you still have 8 spots left on that roster, and you're kind of in this mode of like, hey, I can pinpoint individual players who are going to hit in individual spots. Like, you still have a lot left to get right from there down like a difficult pathway, as opposed to saying, okay, what if this game shoots out and then you're covering multiple spots and you're actually, now you're down to 4 spots left on a roster, 5 spots left on a roster. You've already gotten several spots right, or directionally gotten several spots right, and hopefully you got the right players. And then this other game, this Seattle-Arizona game, I think is like the prime example of a broad range of outcomes where we've got this 47.5 point total, but is it a real 47.5 point total? Arizona has 4 games this year where they've scored 17 or fewer points. They have 4 games this year where they've allowed 15 or fewer points, but they also have 5 games where they've scored 28 plus. They have 4 games where they've allowed 27 plus. Kyler has 5 games this year of 15.8 or fewer DraftKings points. Then he also has 4 games of 25 plus DraftKings points. So this is like a massive barbell type of setup where if you get like average points per game and then somebody scores kind of their average points per game, that's really not helping you in a tournament. What you really want is these outlier scores. And so somebody like Kyler, who's priced where he's priced because of his average point per game production, is a great play in tournaments because, yeah, we don't want his 15-pointer, his 12-pointer, his 5-pointer, whatever. But if he gets that, that's really not too different from him getting 17 points, right? You're probably not winning a tournament with 17 points from Kyler. You're not winning a tournament with 5 points or 12 points from Kyler. But if he gets up to 25, 28, 30 points, now all of a sudden you're sitting pretty, you're way ahead of the field in terms of, your pathway to winning a tournament. And so, yeah, I really like this game because, again, could it play out to the downside and be one of these like 20 to 17 types of games or 17 to 15 types of games? It absolutely could. But there's this broad range of outcomes where it can also play out to the upside, and we end up with a 31 to 28 type of shootout. So I really like the idea on this particular week where there's so much uncertainty, not a lot of games that are likely to shoot out, of building around this game where there's certainly clear pathways to this game shooting out.
Yeah, and lots of divisional implications on the line here
huge.
too. I mean, so these guys are going to come out guns a-blazing. Let me ask you about another divisional matchup as you head off screen for the toilet paper roll here. We have an AFC East matchup between the Patriots and the Dolphins. Tua 5,800, Drake May 5,500. Drake May starting to kind of show some signs of life, still made some mistakes last week, but you see kind of the fantasy friendly nature of his game. And then we also see Tyreek Hill starting to pick it up. Both of these teams, have allowed some kind of explosive plays. What do you think about these quarterbacks in this game environment?
Yeah, speaking of the Patriots, we were all over Kendrick Bourne last week too. Isn't it a shame when you have those weeks where you're on Kendrick Bourne, you're on Geno Smith, nobody's on them, and it doesn't actually matter because it's like you've got Taysom Hill and Amon-Ra St. Brown in the same week. This is a really interesting game where I can throw the implied team totals out of the window because it's like, yeah, the Patriots can underwhelm, but Drake May, we talked about it last week. He's in this Jameis Winston mode right now where it's like, he's just taking risks downfield. And so that can lead to turnovers and it can lead to low scoring from the Patriots. It can lead to the other team kind of controlling the game, but it can also lead to big plays. So there's this broad range of outcomes here. And to me, in a game where you have Tyreek Hill, a game where you have even Jalen Waddle, who I never play, but it just seems like we're getting close to the time where Jalen Waddle is going to have the random blow-up game. His price is so low now, and nobody's going to be on him. You got Jalen Waddle, you got Tyreek Hill, you've got Achane, these explosive guys where if the Patriots keep this game competitive and close and are scoring points on their end, all of a sudden this becomes like a mega game stack type of situation in terms of you can get this cheap game stack on the Patriots side. You can get these explosive players on the other side. So yeah, I think that the likeliest, what Vegas is painting, the picture Vegas is painting for us here is definitely what's likeliest to happen. Patriots score under 20 points or right at 20 points. Dolphins control this game. We don't necessarily get this huge like blow up type of game environment, but there's a very clear scenario in which the Patriots do really well on offense and are scoring, 24, 27 points. And this ends up being like a 30 to 27 type of game that the Dolphins win and stay aggressive throughout. So I really like the idea of Drake May led game stacks that pull in, like that you're playing primarily for the fact that it tells a story of the Dolphins pieces having to have a big game. I mean, Devon Achane is like an ace play on the slate regardless, but in terms of being able to play Achane and Tyreek Hill together in a story that makes a lot of sense, where you got Achane, Tyreek Hill, or Achane and Waddle, or Tyreek Hill and Waddle, and you play Drake May instead of Tua because you're talking about Drake May running the ball and keeping this game close. I mean, there's a lot of fun stuff you can play around with in this game.
Yeah, I like that too. So it seems like a couple game environments that you've mentioned, or maybe three, the Niners, the Packers, this one, we just talked about Arizona, Seattle, where like the potential for explosives are there, but there's also a lot of downside if things don't go well. So it's going to be a week to embrace some risk in tournaments. Let me ask you about Patrick Mahomes. Kind of feels like the Jared Goff of this week, where it's like such a good spot against the Panthers, and yet you can easily tell yourself a story where they just completely handle this on the ground and he doesn't have to get pushed. How do you think about Mahomes at 6,800 here?
Yeah, I think that this is a perfect example of that type of game that we talked about at the top, where could we see the Chiefs using this as live game reps and going out there and just continuing to call their offense throughout this game, an offense that look, they added DeAndre Hopkins part with you this season. They lost Rashee Rice. They lost Juju. Now Juju's back. They've gone through the running back situation. Travis Kelce had the slow start to the season. We're getting close to the playoffs, and this is a 9-1 team, right? They could have the number 1 seed, could have the number 2 seed. Like, they need to continue to develop this offense at this point. And so what I saw with the Lions was in part just kind of a thing of like, hey, let's just put on film for teams that they can't know what we're going to do. Let's continue to get better through the passing game with some live game reps. So it wouldn't surprise me if the Chiefs come out in this game and say, now, granted, there's some recency bias, right? We just saw the Lions do this, so now we're on the lookout for another team that could do this. So are the chances high that is this a 25, 50% chance that the Chiefs do this? No. But is it a 10% chance? Like, I would say probably that the Chiefs come out and say, okay, like, let's just keep running our offense throughout this game. Let's have Mahomes throw the ball 35 times. Let's have him throw it 38 times and just continue to stay sharp and get some live game reps under our belt. So, yeah, I mean, I think that Mahomes becomes very interesting on this slate where, yeah, I mean, we look at his scores throughout the season and it's like, really, why would we play Mahomes? But if he comes out here and if they're like, hey, let's throw it 35 times against the Panthers, would it surprise us if he throws 4 touchdown passes? It shouldn't, right? 300 yards, 4 touchdown passes. So there's certainly potential here for, and again, it's like a game stack type thing. You throw on Patrick Mahomes and 2 or even 3 other pieces and just say, Kansas City runs up the score here. They score 40 plus. Last week, Jameson Williams hit. Last week, David Montgomery hit. Last week, Amon-Ra St. Brown hit. And even Jahmyr Gibbs had a solid game. Laporta had a solid game. So this idea of Mahomes plus 2 or 3 guys, I think, is viable if you want to paint this picture of Chiefs come out, play their offense the whole time, and smash.
You can do real quick rapid fire if there's another name you want to mention. I guess 2 more I just want to toss out real quick because they look interesting to me. Bo Nix been playing on fire and now has another decent matchup against the Raiders. And then CJ Stroud, gets Nico Collins back. We see them starting to pass a little bit more and not an intimidating matchup necessarily against the Titans. Any thoughts on those 2?
Yeah, I'm not super interested in Stroud. Not to say that he can't hit, but that's not really where I'm looking this week. Bo Nix, you've got a team that doesn't get pressure, and his splits versus pressure, not pressure, are dramatic. And so, yeah, I mean, I think he's in play. This isn't a spot where I'm going to Bo Nix, but certainly not arguing against him this week.
All right, let's move on to running back so we can continue to cover a decent amount of ground here. We do have Christian McCaffrey at the top, Joe Mixon, who has just been operating as an insane workhorse coming off a 3-touchdown game. You mentioned Achane as an ace play. As we stare at the top options here, any of these guys rising to the top for you more than others?
Yeah, I mean, Achane is the one who stands out the most, followed by McCaffrey. I don't have arguments against Mixon. I think that his price is a little inflated compared to expectations in this particular game environment. So I won't be playing Mixon this week, but certainly not arguing against him. Like, I think he's still a perfectly sharp play. Just in terms of paring down my own list, he didn't make the cut. And then Jahmyr Gibbs up here as well. Anytime the Lions score 30-plus points, Gibbs is a good bet for 25-plus DraftKings points. So he's kind of a tier below Achane and McCaffrey for me. And slightly above Mixon for me. But yeah, you can make a strong case for any of these 4 guys. They're all solid plays.
What I don't know how much of the Niners you've been able to watch, but one thing I've seen from film watchers is people saying that like McCaffrey doesn't look like himself. Obviously, his role is the old role, but as far as like his burst and explosiveness, are you seeing that? Does that give you any pause at this price tag?
No, I mean, he's also, he's played 2 games, right? And so it sometimes takes players a little bit of time to ramp up. That's one of those spots where I think you can get too fine with your ability to say exactly what's happening. And a lot of times, feel is more valuable than logic here, where we can just say, is McCaffrey still in his normal role? Does he still have the upside that he typically has? Yes. And so again, he's a tier below Achane for me, but I still think Christian McCaffrey is a super sharp play.
Yep. Makes sense there. We're going to kind of table the Kareem Hunt and the Chiefs backfield just because that is so news dependent. I don't think you need either JM or I to tell you that Kareem Hunt's a good play if Pacheco is out at that price tag. So let's hit a couple other spots. I do think it's interesting to discuss the running backs in that Seahawks Cardinals game, because part of the thing that makes that tricky of how to attack that game is we have seen game scripts where they lean on Kenneth Walker, they lean on James Conner. How do those pieces factor into how you're thinking about that game environment?
Yeah, I mean, those guys, you're really talking about, do they score the touchdowns or do they not score the touchdowns? And so it's if you bet on the game environment and bet on a lot of touchdowns piling up, right? If this ends up being a 17-14 game, probably Kenneth Walker and James Conner are not viable in this game. If this ends up being a 27-30 point game, all of a sudden both of these guys are viable and the quarterbacks are viable in this game as well. So it's sort of a thing where, to me, like, I like these guys. One-off plays are totally fine. But still, if you're playing these guys, you are betting on this game trending to the upside. And so it's perfectly fine to include these guys with quarterbacks from this game, with wide receivers from this game, tight ends from this game, because that's really the story that you're telling when you play these guys, is you get one of these higher scoring games from these offenses. James Conner hasn't topped, I think it's 22.3 DraftKings points, 22.4 DraftKings points this year, but he also has a game of 22.4, 22.3, 21.3, 20.2, all these games in the high teens. Last year, he put up a 28-pointer and a 30-pointer with Kyler on the field. So that upside is certainly there, and the consistency is just really nice. So adding him to a roster that's building around this game, or adding him just to any roster, makes plenty of sense because he's so central to that offense. Kenneth Walker, his role is ranges more up and down, where we see these 12, 13, 14 carry games. You see the 20 plus carry games. You see the 8 target games. You see the 2 target games. So you're kind of playing whack-a-mole a little bit more with him, but certainly the upside is there. So Conner, to me, is a more stable play with the same upside. And then Kenneth Walker, just because they have the same upside doesn't mean that Conner is going to hit this week because Walker hits, right? So it's still possible for Walker to hit and Conner to score like 17. But in terms of like where you get the highest consistency and ceiling is through James Conner, and then Kenneth Walker, same ceiling, just a lower floor.
One of the other places I sense people are going to gravitate to value, especially if Pacheco plays and people don't love the Hunt stuff as much, is Brian Robinson, 5,600. We got the Commanders as, over 10-point favorites at home against the Cowboys. Cowboys defense decimated, short week, traveling, all of that stuff. Brian Robinson, good chalk, bad chalk, if he becomes popular.
Decent chalk. He's got, let's see, his last, he's got 2 catches, like in his last, 5 or 6 games, right? So you're literally betting on him as a yardage and touchdown back. And here are his carry numbers of late: 16, 16, 12, 7. He got hurt that game. 21, 16, 17, 12, right? Like, probably he's not topping 16 or 17 carries. So you're talking about a guy who's not going to catch passes, is going to get about 16 carries in a great matchup. Like, does that matter? Does that get him to the 100-yard bonus? Probably not. Like, he's certainly an underdog to get the 100-yard bonus. Does that get him a couple touchdowns? Maybe, but maybe not, right? So all of a sudden you're looking at, even a touchdown, you're looking at, say he catches 0 passes, 75 rushing yards and a touchdown, that's 13.5 DraftKings points. If he doesn't get the touchdown, that's single-digit DraftKings points. So I think he's a perfectly fine play. I think that people are probably overlooking Rachaad White and Bucky Irving, where because they're splitting the backfield, people are kind of like, I don't know if I want to go to them. But like, if you look at the production, these are better plays than Brian Robinson has been on the year, right? Where Rachaad White, he's getting all these targets, recent reception totals of 6, 3, 5, 6, 19, 12, 16, 29 DraftKings points in these games. And then Bucky Irving getting kind of similar target totals, but then more of the work on the ground. So, both these guys, you're talking about approaching 10 rushing attempts per game, which isn't too far off Brian Robinson. When you think about like a rushing attempt is worth a lot less in fantasy than a target. And then they're also seeing a lot more targets than him. So to me, I don't think that Mike Evans coming back necessarily impacts this, because Mike Evans this year in this Liam Cohen offense has been the 6, 7, 8 target per game guy on the perimeter for chunk plays. Chris Godwin was the guy getting 10, 12, 14 targets underneath, helping them move the chain. So since Chris Godwin has gone down, obviously Cade Otton has ascended, but also Bucky Irving and Rachaad White have ascended as critical pieces for marching the field. So I think both these guys are very interesting, where three of their last 4 games, they've combined for like 32 plus DraftKings points. One of them, they combined for 45 DraftKings points. Well, those points probably won't be split exactly down the middle, which means you got a good shot at one of these guys going for 3.5x, 4x their salary multiplier. So yeah, I mean, I like Brian Robinson. He's certainly on my list. Excuse me, but I think that these guys are right up there with him and maybe even a little bit above him, given what would make us the most money this week, right? Fewer people will be on them. They can easily outscore Brian Robinson Jr. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that in terms of like what makes you the most money over time, it's these two guys.
Let me toss out maybe a bucket of players with a similar theme, maybe slightly too pricey, but, project for a ton of volume. Guys like Josh Jacobs, Tony Pollard, Rhamondre Stevenson, Aaron Jones, Jonathan Taylor, anything kind of jump out. I'll toss Chuba Hubbard in there as well. Any names there pop out to you?
Yeah, I mean, most of these guys are in, pretty tough matchups in terms of like their pathways to a ceiling game. I think Rhamondre is probably the most interesting of the guys that you threw out there. Aaron Jones, I think it's worth mentioning that his role has really shifted the last 2 weeks. Cam Akers is like basically a 1B back right now. In fact, I contrasted Brian Robinson's touches with Cam Akers' touches in recent weeks, where it's like Cam Akers is basically seeing the same number of targets as Brian Robinson and like 4 fewer carries than Brian Robinson. He's 4,400. So if you really needed to save salary, I think he's an interesting place to go. But yeah, I think that, Pollard, we've seen the price drop, but it's just a really tough matchup against Houston. Yeah, out of all the guys you said, I don't know that I'm going out of my way to like tell people don't play these guys, but Rhamondre is the only one who really stands out to me. And I think, the more we just play the sharpest plays at running back, the better position we're going to be in over time, because running back touches, running back production is all more projectable. And so if we can kind of like for me this week, of the 6, 7 highest projected owned running backs, like all of them except Mixon are on my core list. And that was just like naturally built my core list, right? And they're all the highest owned guys. Well, that's not unusual for me. For all the running backs, I like to also be the highest owned running backs, because running back is just a place where we can project what's going to happen with a lot more comfort and ease. And if there's 6, 7, 8 running backs worth liking, chances are like at least 2 or 3 of them are going to have a good game. So now you're trying to outsmart those 2, 3, 4 popular guys who hit with less popular guys who are less likely to hit. So wide receiver, tight end is really, passing attacks is really the place to go off the board more, where running back, it's not bad to kind of stick with what makes the most sense on paper, because, some of these plays are going to hit and you have to outscore those plays that do hit.
About to move on, although we got the same question twice in the chat. And since these were the 2 running backs that you seem to prefer sub 6K, want to pass this along. Peter and Imwald here wondering, could you perhaps play these guys together at this price tag, matchup, all of that good stuff?
Yeah. And in smaller field play, I actually think it's super sharp to play them together. The one wrench here is I'm sitting here saying Mike Evans coming back probably doesn't change the way they're used that much, but what if it does, right? And so the risk you would be taking on if Mike Evans were still out would actually be pretty minimal. If Mike Evans were still out, you'd be taking 2 guys who have scored 32, 35, and 45 combined points, right? 45 combined points, that's hard to get from 2 running backs at all, let alone 2 running backs sub 6K. And these guys kind of work in tandem in that they're being used together. If the backfield is doing well, both guys are doing well. 35 points, even that would be really nice, given the way that NFL scoring is shaken out this season. I would probably want to play another running back in the flex with him if I could, because that's where a lot of the upside is on this particular week. So playing Achane or playing Christian McCaffrey, but you don't have to do that. There are ways to do it without that. But yeah, for me, that's like if you're trying to beat 10,000 entries, even 5,000 entries, you're probably capping your upside a little bit too much by playing these 2 guys together. But if you're down in like a 2,000 entry tournament, or especially 1,000 or fewer entry tournament, I actually really like these guys together. It's a rare situation where you can play 2 running backs in the same field from the same team. It actually makes sense.
Man, now I mean, this isn't the block, but are you sure you don't want to do Tommy DeVito, Bucky Irving, and Rashad White? Because that's starting to sound like a fun time to me, Jay.
I've had some starting points, and you throw Theo Johnson in there as a stacking partner with Tommy DeVito. The thing is, on this particular week, this is what's weird about this week is like, where are you super excited to spend salary? You know, like now you've tapped out. Mike Evans is probably not going on this Tommy DeVito, Bucky Irving, Rashad White roster. You could throw Malik Neighbors on there, but you're really like digging deep. And so it's not like you're saving salary to play Justin Jefferson in 2023 in a great matchup, and Tyreek Hill in 2023, and Amon-Ra St. Brown in a like back and forth game. It's like you're saving all this salary, and you've got Nico Collins in a tough matchup against Tennessee. You got Malik Neighbors with Tommy DeVito. You got CeeDee Lamb with Cooper Rush, Justin Jefferson playing Chicago. So yeah, I mean it's an interesting thing to play around with. But then the question becomes, what are you really saving the salary for? Right? They still got to hit for high end scores. But if they hit for high-end scores, you could be sitting pretty. So, yeah, I mean, I definitely messed around with that this week.
All right. Before we move on to wide receiver, a couple things. Appreciate everyone watching live as we stream this here on the Pete Overzet YouTube channel. I also post the audio of these to the In a Vacuum podcast feed if you aren't able to catch the whole thing or you need to listen to it on the go. If you are watching live, though, subscribe. Helps the channel out. I think we just hit a subscriber milestone recently, too. Did we just hit 19K subs a few weeks ago? So appreciate all the subs. Yeah. Hit 19K. If you can hit the like button, let's get to 20K. That'd be a nice round number that my OCD would like to look at when I log into the YouTube analytics. And also, we got to mention the promo code up on 1 week season. Of course, all of JM's expanded thoughts. You know, we're just getting the tip of the iceberg here on the site. Do a deep dive into all of these individual matchups they can get in the edge. And then all of the DFS specific stuff will end up in the scroll, which will populate tonight and over the weekend, and includes JM's updated thoughts on Sunday AM as well. So, you know, a lot of things can shift. We're talking about the injury dynamics, players ruled in, ruled out. You can get JM's final thoughts, all of that with a 1 week season sub, and you can still get 50% off with promo code PETE50. That's PETE50 will get you 50% off your rest of season DFS subs. And if you just want to try it out for a week, you can always use promo code PETE for 20% off weekly pass. JM, anything I'm forgetting over in the 1 week season neck of the woods?
No, sir.
All right. Let's move on to wide receiver. It is really sad when you reference, you know, Justin Jefferson like that. And I've been staring at him this week doing some drafts. I see him like sliding in drafts past guys I never would have thought Justin Jefferson would slide past. What's going on here? Is there any hope for a bounce back? He's 8,100 this week.
Yeah, I mean, teams are trying to win games, right? They're not interested in statistics. Who cares about statistics? If you're an NFL head coach, you're trying to win games. And so Justin Jefferson, it's not like a Tyreek Hill thing of like, man, what's wrong with Tyreek Hill? Like Justin Jefferson looks 100% like Justin Jefferson. It's just you've got Sam Darnold under center as opposed to Kirk Cousins. And so you're calling games differently. You're managing everything differently. 8 targets, 9 targets, 9 targets, 9 targets. That's a direct function of the passing volume for this offense. And now you're playing a Bears team that's really good against the pass. Can Justin Jefferson hit for a 40-pointer? Yeah, but what are the chances? They're really low. And I think that we're reading that right. And I think that's really been the nature of DFS this year, is that reminder that teams are trying to win games. They're not trying to pile up stats. And the ways that defenses are fighting back against offenses, it has led to lower stats, especially for pass catchers. And so we want to really find those spots where, I guess I'll look at it like this. If somebody like Justin Jefferson can only be expected to score 20 to 25 points in a really good game at 8,100, and then you've got, you know, like I said earlier, CeeDee Lamb with Cooper Rush, and you've got Amon-Ra St. Brown, right? Last week he put up, people are going to like Amon-Ra St. Brown this week. He put up 41 points last week, but his second best game of the year is 28 points in a 31-29 game against Minnesota, the type of game where you would expect him to put up that type of score. Then a 25.9 pointer in a game where Jared Goff threw it 54 times, and then everything else is, you know, 21 points and below. So, I mean, realistically, what's our expectation for Amon-Ra St. Brown? About 21 or fewer DraftKings points. You got CeeDee Lamb with Cooper Rush, Nico Collins against Tennessee, Malik Neighbors with Tommy DeVito. You know, I think that this is the type of thing where you could say, hey, probably there's a pretty good chance that all these guys score 21, 22 or fewer DraftKings points. So then if you can find the player who scores 30, regardless of what they cost, you are moving so far ahead of the field, because none of these guys individually are going to be super popular, but you put cumulative ownership of all these guys together. And it's like, okay, like what if Tyreek Hill scores 35 and what if Mike Evans scores 30 and those are the two guys you have and everybody else is piling on these other guys who all score, 18 to 21, you're getting quite an edge on the field. So I think that thinking about game environments, individual players who can hit for these bigger games or game environments that can produce these bigger games, whether that's stacking up 49ers and Packers, whether that's stacking up Cardinals and Seahawks, or whether that's targeting, Tyreek Hill, Mike Evans, or whoever you think might be. Maybe you think CeeDee Lamb can go for a 35-pointer. Whoever you think can go for these 35-pointers, and you could really drop the picture of how that happens. I think that's going to be the way to win this week at the wide receiver position.
Yeah, so just to kind of, I guess, emphasize that point, it sounds like maybe outside of Evans, is there anyone else I'm forgetting? For the most part, if you're spending up at one of these wide receivers, it's not really in a one-off capacity. It is part of a bigger game environment bet.
Yeah, I mean, I think Evans and Tyreek Hill are the two guys that I would isolate as comfortable one-offs. And again, like you can paint the picture of CeeDee Lamb hitting. Like if Malik Neighbors hits at 7,400, any roster that mathematically, any roster that plays Malik Neighbors and doesn't play Tommy DeVito is kind of flushing away money, because if Malik Neighbors is able to hit at 7,400, Tommy DeVito is putting up a really nice score for a 4K quarterback, right? So Malik Neighbors, that's a place where you really want to stack him up. Nico Collins, you don't have to stack him up. Justin Jefferson, you don't have to stack him up. Even Amon-Ra St. Brown, you don't have to stack him up. But all of those, you're telling a very unique story where Nico hits for a monster game in this tough matchup against Tennessee, a Tennessee team that probably shouldn't be able to keep pace with Houston. Justin Jefferson, you're telling a story of him breaking through in this tough matchup against the Chicago pass defense, where the game total is low here. Minnesota should be able to control this game with their defense here. And then again, Amon-Ra St. Brown, we went through the numbers and kind of how his scoring has shaken out this year, where typically you're looking for these competitive, high volume, back and forth type games for Amon-Ra St. Brown. Last week was an outlier in terms of where we get our tournament winning games from him. So you're painting a picture of something less likely to happen. And you need to be aware of that if you're playing these guys as one-offs.
Let's then head down into the mid-range, where I anticipate people trying to get some salary relief, able to chase some volume. Kind of see four names up here that are trending to be very popular in this range. I'll toss them out here. Jacoby Myers, Cortland Sutton, Calvin Ridley, and Jauan Jennings. You got pretty low team totals across the board for all four of those guys. I guess maybe good chalk, bad chalk on some of those.
Yeah, Calvin Ridley is the one with like the clearest pathway to a big game, followed by Jauan Jennings, because, this could be a competitive back and forth type of game where Jauan Jennings sees double-digit targets again. I'll keep saying it, like, I won't treat 49ers pass catcher targets as reliable week to week, right? So just because Jauan Jennings has back-to-back games of 11 targets, now if he goes a third straight game of 11 targets, I guess I'll eat crow and be like, yeah, maybe he's just like the alpha in this offense and they're going to design everything for him. And then probably a week later is when he'll sink back down to 6 or 7 targets. But yeah, we have such a huge sample size of 49ers targets not being sticky week to week. So do I think Jauan Jennings is a sharp play in a vacuum? Yes. Do I think he's going to be over-owned relative to his range of outcomes? Also, yes. And then Cortland Sutton and Jacoby Myers, I don't really see it in, both of them have really tough individual matchups. The Raiders have been great against wide receivers this year. Obviously, we know how good the Broncos have been against wide receivers this year. So that's just a pure volume bet. I won't be going to either of those guys. Calvin Ridley, broad range of outcomes, but really high ceiling and usage for the price tag. And then, like I said, Jauan Jennings, no real arguments against him. I think he's a perfectly sharp play in a vacuum. It's just I think he's going to be over-owned relative to his expectations.
What about cheaper value? And I mean, things are tight like usual. So I'll even loosen it to sub 5K as opposed to sub 4K here. You got some Bears wide receivers, maybe Patriots wide receivers, a little love, maybe some Devon Vele love. I don't know. You got anything cheap for us here?
Yeah, I mean, to me, cheap options, the sharpest cheap options are at the tight end position. And again, we're not necessarily scraping around trying to figure out how we can fit in multiple of these 8K guys. I mean, you could try to fit in like a Christian McCaffrey, Devon Achane roster, but even with that, you have plenty of salary flexibility on this week. So to me, I don't necessarily want to take swings on the guys who are low probability with hopefully they end up hitting for something, right? But I do think there are some guys here who could hit for 25 plus points, and that becomes valuable. It's not because we're playing them hoping that they put up a decent score for their price tag. So a couple guys in that range, Xavier Worthy, who, if we just think about this spot, against a Panthers team that just leaves gaping holes of green grass open downfield. This is the type of spot where, again, Kansas City trying to get this offense on track. We see 5-6 targets for Xavier Worthy. We could see him put up a 25-point game. Alec Pierce has 2 of these 24-point games this year. And then obviously the other games all end up being disappointing games. But this is a spot against a Detroit team that's oftentimes, heavy man coverage, gives up some downfield throws, really good defense, but they can be hit for big plays, right? So Alec Pierce is in a spot where wouldn't shock us if he ends up hitting here. And then, you mentioned the Bears. I don't really see I see a lot of people on Keenan Allen. I don't really see that one for me because Keenan Allen, you're betting on volume. But Roma Dunze and DJ Moore, in terms of guys who can hit on limited volume, right? Each of them could see 7 targets and put up 25 plus DraftKings points. And so both of those guys, definitely in the mix for me. When we get cheaper, Michael Wilson, where he hasn't had this big game yet this year, but he's very involved in a good offense. And so there's certainly an outside chance that he ends up producing. Noah Brown outsnapped Terry McLaurin last week and can score from anywhere on the field. He's typically going to see 6-7 targets. So he's one of these guys who the only time he's hit was that Hail Mary game that was just for 16 points, but it's still within his range of outcomes to hit. And so, and that's it. It's kind of thin, right? Like, I think you could take a swing on Jalen Coker. I think you could take a swing on Patriots wideouts, but Kendrick Bourne's going to be more popular than he should be this week after going kind of overlooked last week. And I don't think that there's anything really robust down here at wide receiver.
Yeah, I like the Noah Brown call a lot. I was looking at that. I wrote up my DFS column for Fantasy Life, and it's not even just this past week. Over the past 3 weeks, his rate stats, his usage has been better than Terry McLaurin's, and you're getting like a $2,600 discount on that, and then getting access to that big team total. So I like that call a good bit. And it just feels like the Commanders are flying a little bit under the radar just because people have watched them do 2 stinkers in a row. So I like that one. Before we head over to tight end, I want to mention as well, we got our usual premium shows on the channel this week. I'll have DFS After Dark Saturday night at 9 p.m. I'm having John Boy Beats on. If you guys play on Underdog, you have seen his name at the top of the leaderboard. Super sharp player, also does a lot of data analysis. So we'll have a fun conversation about Underdog strategy. If you become a YouTube member, the Best Ball Value Hounds tier will get you access to that. And then on Sunday, we got the Cram at 10:30 a.m. We will run through all the overnight news, walk through the slate, look at the ownership projections, inactives, all of that stuff. And that is included with the Hand Builders and Opto Bro tier membership. If you sub to the top one, you get access to everything and a private channel within the Deposit Kingdom Discord, which I have the link down below. JM, I'll do my normal thing here and ask you on a scale of 1 to 10, how excited you are to talk about the tight end position this week.
Yeah, my initial tight end pool was Theo Johnson and Luke Schoonmaker. And then I was like, boy, I better expand this a little bit. So, there's certainly an array of options. Obviously, Brock Bowers can always be considered. He finally put up a tournament winner. So obviously people are likelier to flock to that, but it's still within his range of outcomes to do it back-to-back weeks. That's not the likeliest way for things to play out, but that's within his range of outcomes. I think Travis Kelce makes more sense in Mahomes stacks than solo because he's not a big play guy. Like, I like Xavier Worthy as a one-off from this game. Travis Kelce, you're more betting on volume. If you're betting on volume from Mahomes against the Panthers, there's a pretty good chance that Mahomes puts up a big score as well. So you can play Kelce without Mahomes, but I kind of prefer Kelce with Mahomes. I might have a little bit of both, but prefer him with Mahomes. And then obviously you got this, $4K to $4,300 tier of Sam Laporta, TJ Hawkinson, Geno Smith, Hunter Henry, who are all kind of appropriately priced, where most of the time they're going to put up 7, 8, 9 points, but all of them have, 17 to 20 points within their range of outcomes. And all of them have outlier scenarios in which they score 25 plus. So the likeliest outcome here is that, one of these guys hits double digits and, falls below 15 while the other guys kind of creep up close to double digit points. But there's an outside shot that one of these guys ends up like actually mattering on this slate. So yeah, that's kind of where my eyes are at tight end. And then outside of that, the question becomes, does anybody at tight end put up a score you really had to have? Does anybody put up 25 points? And if not, then, basically Theo Johnson, Luke Schoonmaker, you're saying, okay, these guys probably put up 6, 7 points in a bad game. They probably put up 14 or 15 in a good game. And at their price tags and what they open up, that's pretty valuable on this week. So yeah, I don't mind going up at tight end, but I also don't mind going down at tight end this week.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm sure we're all feeling a little burned. Last week it was no Bowers, no Jonnu, no Taysom, no money. Pretty unusual to have 3 tight ends at all different price points too, kind of go that nuclear. So we'll see what shakes out this week. I say we head over and build a lineup here, JM, on the DraftKings site. I don't know why that was so hard for me.
Well, I was figuring you were looking for the video. You were just.
I was multitasking, trying to find my way back from a tab I had clicked. As always, DraftKings lineup build here. We got the Deposit Kingdom weekly league. Sad trombone. We did have to make it smaller this week. It didn't fill last week. JM, it's week 12.
It's that point in the season. Yep.
You know how it goes. So we did make it a little smaller, still have the $2,000 up top, though. We basically just axed some of the min caches. So if you're hunting for that 2K prize in the glory of having your team reviewed on the Monday morning portfolio reviews, that dream is still intact. JM, I was very excited when you teased this block to me pre-show. Let the people know what we're rolling with here.
Yeah, so this block, I'm calling it 20%. And I'll explain why here in a moment. But this block is Kyler Murray, Marvin Harrison Jr., and Trey McBride. So I want to talk let's get sexy, talk a little math real quickly.
You want to grab your toilet paper again before we
got toilet paper. I've got my merino wool yoga pants on. Okay, so when we think about now this year, players not even priced this way, but traditionally DraftKings prices players in such a way that they're going to score roughly 4x their salary, roughly 25% of the time. This year, it's more like roughly 3.5 to 4x their salary, roughly 20% of the time, but we won't even get into that, right? Let's just talk traditional DraftKings pricing. To get 3 players right, 3 players who are going to keep you on a 200-point pace, you have a 25% chance in slot 1. If you have 3 uncorrelated players, you have a 25% chance in slot 2, you have a 25% chance in slot 3, but the chances of those 3 players all hitting for 4x on the same week together is about 1.5%. In fact, if we said, 20% of the time these guys are going for 4x their salary, that would be about 0.8% would be your chances of, 1 out of every 100 rosters, 1 out of every 75 rosters, 80 rosters, you're going to get all of these guys right together. Well, because Kyler, Marvin Harrison, and Trey McBride are correlated, when they hit, they can hit together, right? So we actually have 20% of their games this season where they've combined for a 4x salary pace. They've one week playing these 3 together would have kept you on a 211-point pace. 1 week playing these 3 together would have kept you on a 221-point pace. Pretty critically, Marvin Harrison Jr. has hit twice this year. Those are also the 2 best games that Trey McBride had. Trey McBride has hit twice this year. Those are the 2 best games Marvin Harrison Jr. had. So you're basically saying these guys have bend bundled together in game environments where Kyler's having to throw the ball a lot. These are the 2 main weapons. Kyler's scoring touchdowns. These guys are catching passes, scoring touchdowns, and you end up getting this bundle that works really well together. And so this is in terms of like, hey, this is hit 20% of the time this year. Well, that doesn't seem super high. But when you think of it in terms of getting 3 spots on your roster correct toward a 200-point pace, and you think about the math compared to 3 uncorrelated bets, trying to get those right, this has been a 20% chance this year. And obviously we're talking small samples, right? 10 games, but that shows us like, even if we go all season, this is plus 10% of the time that it would have happened throughout the season compared to a 1.5% chance of 3 uncorrelated plays covering 3 different roster spots. So I just wanted to go through that to illustrate like why we think about these stacks, these blocks, why it's so critical, why it helps us so much beyond just the points that we get. The math works in our favor so much when we can get 3 spots right with 1 bet. And so this is a really interesting one where you get a natural bring back from the other side with DK Metcalf or Jackson Smith and Jigba. You get a lot of ceiling. You can even do Kenneth Walker instead. You get a lot of ceiling on this roster. You're telling a story of a game environment taking off where if it's the only game environment that takes off, you're way ahead of the field. So yeah, just a lot to like from on this stack, on this block in terms of like how plus EV it is.
Yeah, I like this call a lot. And I mean, you mentioned Michael Wilson before, but this offense is so concentrated on Marvin Harrison and McBride. And, you know, McBride's such a volume earner. Marvin Harrison Jr., I was listening to my buddy Pat Carrain on his walkthrough, and he was talking about how many first read targets Marvin Harrison has been earning, which shows a lot of faith in him as a top weapon on this offense. So I like this stack. You mentioned the bring back idea and previously wanting to play this through a game environment. Are we going to be putting a Seahawks piece on this team?
Yeah, absolutely. If I'm playing this, we're betting on a game where, like we said, this is a barbell type of game. So it could be low scoring, but also could be really high scoring. The least likely thing to happen is this game kind of landing in the middle. The least likely thing to happen, both these teams are implied for 23.75. The least likely thing to happen is both these teams scoring right about in that range. We're likelier to see this being a lower scoring game or a higher scoring game than that. So in this stack, we're betting on this being a higher scoring game than that, which means that we want DK Metcalf or Jackson Smith and Jigba as a bring back, because again, we are betting on a scenario where this game takes off, where we have a concentrated offense on the other side. And Pete, this is pretty crazy, but the games in which JSN and DK Metcalf has hit, JSN has hit 3 times, DK Metcalf has hit once. Geno's only hit in one of those games. Also, Geno's hit in 2 other games where neither of his pass catchers hit. So just this weird type of setup where that will continue throughout this week, but where Marvin Harrison and Trey McBride and Kyler Murray have been heavily correlated. Pass catchers and Geno have not necessarily been correlated. So it actually is this great setup where we can pull in one of the Seattle pieces and we might end up with them hitting and Geno scoring 17 to 20 points, you know, and end up that you didn't need Geno, that the Geno rosters are getting hurt, even though that wide receiver is benefiting. Not to say it's going to play out that way, but just to say, like, there has been a track record of things playing out that way. That's within the range of outcomes where, like, Kyler stacks is the perfect way to play this game. And one of these Seattle wide receivers can hit without you having to compete against the heavy ownership Geno rosters. I
like that. So which Seattle wide receiver piece do you gravitate to here? Obviously a $300 price difference between those guys.
Yeah, $300 price difference. They're being projected for basically the same ownership, and really nothing distinguishes one guy from the other. JSN has hit 3 times. DK Metcalf's hit once, but one of those, you know, for JSN was a game where DK Metcalf missed. So I don't mind just kind of closing our eyes and picking one or the other. We can throw DK Metcalf on here, and then if we need the salary, we can pivot down to JSN.
Perfect. All right. Metcalf's on here. Obviously, this is the late game. So we will show we know ball and put DK Metcalf in our flex here, unless we go with 3 running backs, in which case we will adjust.
Or a tight end in the flex, which I think
or a tight end
could be what's required here to kind of unlock things. So yeah, we know ball, but we might need to move some things around.
You know what? I'm just gonna walk that back right now because I have a feeling we're gonna need a tight end in the flex, maybe. DST, do we want to go there just to kind of see what kind of salary that leaves us with for the remaining 4 spots?
Yeah, we can go to the Broncos at defense. There's kind of five deep. You know, the Chiefs are playing tremendous defense, aggressive defense, playing Bryce Young. The Lions are really good aggressive defense, playing Anthony Richardson. The Texans are really good, moderately aggressive defense, playing Will Levis. The Vikings are really good aggressive defense, playing Caleb Williams. And the Broncos are really good aggressive defense, playing against Gardner Minshew. So like all 5 of these defenses stand out to me this week. Denver on the road, but those Las Vegas games are typically, you know, they don't really have a fan base built up in Las Vegas yet. Those Las Vegas games are often kind of like road games for the Raiders, and I would expect the Broncos fans to travel well. So kind of like a Broncos home game in terms of crowd noise. Broncos 3,200, I think, make a lot of sense here.
All right, that leaves us about 5,500 for these 4 spots. We got the 2 running backs. I have a feeling this is going to feature a Bucs running back.
Yeah, so there's kind of two ways to approach this from this point. Is like we could say, is this a smaller field build, and we could actually throw both Bucs running backs on here, or we could say maybe this is a larger field build, and we want to make sure we prioritize Achane on this roster. Now we could probably fit both Bucs running backs and Achane on this roster. We could probably fit Tyreek Hill on this roster. We could fit Mike Evans on this roster and avoid Bucs running backs. So yeah, there's a lot of ways we can go, but I definitely want a piece from the Bucs on this roster. I want to bet on that offense with Baker Mayfield under center. So we could start with Rachaad White and then give ourselves flexibility to kind of move around from there. And I would even say, let's start with Rachaad White and Devon Achane, because he's kind of a priority piece for me this week that, you know, if I'm making sacrifices, I want to make them in order to fit in Devon Achane. And what we see are 9,400 left in salary. And we think about Luke Schoonmaker, who brings us down to 6,900 in available salary, right? Like, or Theo Johnson, 6,500 in available salary. We also have that flexibility move from DK Metcalf down to JSN. So let's go ahead and throw let's go ahead and throw Schoonmaker in here in the flex position. 6 targets and 10 targets in the 2 games that Jake Ferguson has missed. The 10 targets was a heavy pass attempt game from Cooper Rush, but 6-7 targets at a 2,500 price tag is just sharp, right? Even though he's going to be popular, it's just sharp. The rest of our roster is going to look different. 6,900 doesn't do much for us, but if we move from Metcalf down to JSN, this frees up the salary for us to go up to Tyreek Hill or to do a Mike Evans plus Rachaad White pairing. We talked about this last week, that this Tyreek Hill, Devon Achane thing, it's basically like over a 25% hit rate of Achane and Tyreek hitting together in games where Achane has had a role and Tua has been under center. And so if the typical player hits that multiplier you want about 25% of the time, that's pretty good when you can get these 2 high upside guys together over 25% of the time. So Achane plus Tyreek Hill is definitely a plus EV way to build and gives us a roster that looks a lot like probably some of the rosters I already have saved on my end. But yeah, I mean, I think that this is just gives you like so much upside, right? Tyreek and Achane can combine for 60 plus. Kyler and McBride and Marvin Harrison Jr. can combine for 75 to 80 or more. And so right there, you're sitting at 140 before you even account for Rachaad White, JSN, Schoonmaker, and the Broncos defense. Like, this is clear pathways to a 200-point score on a week where we might not have a lot of 200-point scores.
Yeah, this lineup came together almost a little too easy with how nice it looks here. I was just about to mention this too. We did just get official word that Isaiah Pacheco is out.
Wow.
So this is the Kareem Hunt show. I assume he is going to feature on a lot of your rosters this week at that price tag.
Yeah, and there's, we've got actually a little bit of extra time because there's an interesting discussion to be had here of like, what would we do to get up to Rachaad White, and where would we make a sacrifice? I mean, from Rachaad White up to Kareem Hunt, and where would we make a sacrifice? Because we obviously can't go any cheaper at tight end. We can't take out Marvin Harrison Jr. or Kyler or McBride without wrecking our core thesis. We can move down from Tyreek Hill, but you move down like dramatically if you move from Tyreek Hill down to somebody at 6,900 in terms of ceiling, in terms of likelihood of outcome. So what we could do is we can move either down to Mike Evans, and I think there's some defenses at 3,100. Miami against the Patriots, if we wanted to kind of go with some chalk there, or we go all the way down to the Bears against Sam Darnold, and then we would just have all the salary that we want to do whatever we want at that last wide receiver spot.
Yeah, how have you, because I remember previously we were talking about, I think it was the week the Commanders played the Panthers, and you were saying how you were almost most interested in the running back 2 against the Panthers, because it's just like that player, on these teams this year has been hitting. I mean, I guess that angle's not really in play if it's just the Kareem Hunt show. They don't really have an RB2 who's getting significant touches.
Yeah, well, that's what's so interesting about Kareem Hunt, right? He's had a couple of 27 touch games. He's had 21 plus touches in all but one game. And so they've been comfortable riding him where typically, you're thinking about the playoffs. You're thinking about deeper into the season, right? Why has Devon Achane suddenly had such a bigger role? Well, Miami needs to win out in order to make the playoffs, or pretty close to win out in order to make the playoffs. So you get to a point where you're like, we can't think about body preservation for the playoffs. We got to think about winning this game right now. Well, the Chiefs are in an interesting situation because Pacheco is going to be coming back almost certainly next week. And so why would you not give Kareem Hunt like a thank you on the way out the door of like, here's 25 touches against the Panthers. So yeah, I mean, I think that Kareem Hunt is just super sharp here. I don't think this is one of those spots where I'm concerned about the workload being significantly lightened against this Panthers defense.
I guess the only other concern is there an ownership level that would make you balk? Because I think, we were just going through a lot of the options. We like the Bucs running backs, but to get a 5,700 running back at one of the best matchups, where the role like everything just sets up to where I wouldn't be surprised to see him 55, 60% in small field contests. Is that just something you build around and make work because it's so strong of a play?
Yeah, that's a great question, Pete. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the ownership level would be, where to me it would be more like I have my ownership level set, and then maybe I'm underweight the field or overweight the field, right? So like maybe for me, it would be 35% of my rosters have Kareem Hunt, because we look through these scores, 21.7, 22.3, 21.7, 17, like that's 5 of his last 7 games, right? 17 plus points. And that's not even against the Panthers. And so what we're probably seeing here is around 20 plus points. Does he score 30? Probably not, right? Can he score 13? Yes, but that's not very likely. And so I don't mind riding chalk here at the running back position, knowing I'll be doing things differently elsewhere. but it would all obviously be more like, hey, maybe I've got 35-40% of him. Maybe the field has even more than me, but I'm close enough that if he's hitting, I'm in good shape. If he's missing, now I have an edge on the field. But yeah, certainly wouldn't fade him because of ownership so much as I might end up underweight just because of the enthusiasm the field might end up with.
Yeah, and we'll see kind of what transpires. Obviously, other value opening up can, tilt where people are going to get their value, but he definitely is going to stick out like a sore thumb from a value standpoint. Jam, anything else to remind the people about your content schedule, your other podcasts this week? What should people keep an eye out for?
Yeah, I've got this. I'm doing my solo podcast next, so that'll be interesting. With I can't really slide off screen during that. Yeah, we got the Angles podcast. We've got Solo Ship with myself and Squirrel Patrol. Those can be found on the 1 Week Season YouTube feed or podcast feed. We've got the Scroll coming out. My player grid will come out this evening, and everything else populate this evening tomorrow. So yeah, if you hang out with us, lots of fun stuff coming. If not, you can grab that week pass. Promo code Pete takes 20% off. We'll have a bunch of discounts and sales and whatnot next week for Thanksgiving. And I'll be back here. We're doing this same time, same place next week, right?
Yep, we will be here. Yeah, I was going to touch base with you. Obviously, next Thursday is Thanksgiving, but I'm going to be good to go for my usual stuff on Friday if you are.
Sounds good. Yep.
All right. We will see you guys then 1 week from today. Good luck in week 12. I am in about 20 minutes going to be going live with the Badge Bros. You can watch it on my channel, over on their channel, often on the clock. Very similar show structure here, except all through the lens of the underdog slate. So we'll do our favorite value plays, scroll down guys, small field, large field strategy, build some pick'ems, all of that good stuff. So join us over there for Often on the Clock. And then I'll also see you guys on Saturday night for DFS After Dark. Appreciate you guys hanging out in the chat. Good luck this weekend. Don't dupe us with those lineups. All right. Those are just for us. Nobody else gets to play those. We'll see you guys next time on the blog.